All right, what's going on, guys? Today we're going to be going into a deep dive on quad biomechanics. Now, this was a really highly requested video, and just like the other body part specific videos that I've done, I think that there's like one or two key concepts that most people are missing that's preventing them from maximizing their gains and also potentially putting unnecessary stress on their joints and back. Before we start our deep dive, I just want to let you know that you can check the description below, and I've got my schedule listed if you are interested in any consultations or you need help programming. I also have a link for my YouTube membership options where you get exclusive videos, you get my personal workouts, and all kinds of exclusive content. So check that out if you're interested. So I really think if you're going to be giving advice on how to build a body part, you need to either have it developed, and it's been developed, which isn't always the best person to go to because sometimes they don't even know what they're doing to make it good. But for example, my chest, whenever I did the chest video, I kind of showed how it's always been a really strong body part and what I did to make it that way from the beginning. In my back and shoulder videos, it was more about showing you how I was able to grow them and change them so dramatically once I understood a few key concepts. And I would say legs are going to fall into that category as well, at least quads. They were not a strong body part for me. So let's take a look. On the left is my first classic physique show, and then on the right is just a year later, and you can just see there's a crazy difference in size and definition as well. In fact, after this show, the feedback was, hey, grow your quads a little bit, grow your legs a little bit, and then a year later, I had some of the best legs in the classic division, at least in the guys that I competed with. And this is a year's difference leading up to the show. So you can see, I mean, huge difference in adductors and quads, but my main growth was actually coming from my adductors and my posterior chain. I really just focused on getting more intensity on my legs. I focused on just putting more volume, more frequency. I really wasn't going super duper like quad specific necessarily. So I was just growing everywhere, and I needed it at the time. There's another shot from the same show, and you can just see that I had definitely probably the strongest legs on stage, the best separation, the best detail, and the best size. And this was actually a pretty tricky class. I ended up placing third out of these three guys. This guy here is a pro now, and this is the competition that made me realize I'm not meant to be classic physique, because I was as ripped and as hard as you can get at that body weight, and I didn't have the structure for it. So I ended up putting on a little bit more size, and I grew out of the classic physique division, and I went open. And here's another year's worth of progress, and you can see not as big of a jump at all, but definitely more adductors and more sweep coming off the hip especially. And at this point, I'm starting to try to put a little more emphasis on my quads, and I'm just doing this by doing the whole dead guy anatomy line of thinking. I'm trying to stay a little bit more upright, and I'm trying to push my knees over my toes a little bit more, just thinking about like the moment arm more or less. Now fast forward to my last show, and I think you can see a pretty big difference on the sweep, on the detail. I'm not even necessarily as lean here as I was in these pictures, but my quads have way more detail. Not only do they have better sweep, but they've got way more detail. And a lot of that came from grasping what I'm about to explain to you guys, understanding this concept. And here's a picture just from last week, and I think my quads are the best they've ever been. I'm not pushing anything. I'm not even really working out that hard, but I've got way more sweep. I've got way more striations than I ever had, and my vastus lateralis. And I just think that I really have found the secret to getting really nicely developed quads without having to sacrifice your knees or your back. So what is the secret? Now, I think most people think along the lines of what I mentioned earlier. If they really want to target quads, they tend to stay more upright. They try to get more forward knee drive. I do know that there are some people who think that you're going to get the best quads by getting the biggest, deepest range of motion possible, the most amount of knee flexion no matter what. And that's not the case at all. If you watch my channel, I hope you understand by now that excessive range of motion is fucking retarded, especially if you're trying to keep tension on your quads. You know, you want to pull a Joel Siemens style, stop at about 90 degrees, stop where you're maximizing the internal rotation force. That'll keep it on your quads. Not saying you gotta do that for every body part, but for your quads, that's what you want to do. Go any deeper, it's adductors and butt, or back if you're doing it all fucked up. So the dead guy anatomy point of view is like partially right. You do want to think about being a little more upright and having a forward knee drive, but what you've got to manage while you're doing this is you've got to bias internal rotation, because you can think about knees going forward and staying upright all you want, but if you're not biasing internal rotation, you're not going to be putting as much tension on your quads as you could. So in order to get the most out of your squat pattern, just think about these steps. And I like the hack squat the best for this, but this would be any kind of a squat pattern. You want to start really heavy on your heel. This is going to be representative of early propulsion. And I'm not the kind of person that relates every single thing in the gym to gait, but I do think you can relate a squat pattern to parts of the gait cycle, and you can actually kind of understand why doing it this way is optimal to keep tension on your quads. So we're starting on our heels and early propulsion. As soon as we start our descent, we're going to let your femurs internally rotate ever so slightly. You don't want to consciously think about doing a lot of that. It's going to come more from the foot context, but in the very beginning, just go ahead and just very slightly internally rotate the femurs. So not to the point where you're losing the outer part of your foot. You always want to keep that fifth metatarsal head on the ground. You just don't want to be heavy on it. You don't want to collapse on the inside. So you're going to start your descent on the middle of the heel, and as soon as you start, you're internally rotating just barely from the femurs. As you're going down, the weight's shifting from your middle heel to your inner heel. And as you continue to go down, it's going to shift from 80% your inner heel to maybe 50-50 between your inner heel and your first metatarsal head. So the joint underneath your big toe. As you continue to get deeper, now we're really driving those knees forward. We're maintaining the internal rotation of the femurs. We're maintaining the inside foot contacts. And as we get to the end of the range of motion, we should get to the point where we start to feel the foot flatten out and want to go through pronation. The arch wants to go down. And your knees as far forward as you can get without your heels coming up. Now, going from that early propulsive start position to mid propulsion, that is the most quad dominant part of the gait cycle there is. That is maximizing internal rotation force that you're putting into the ground. That's maximizing force production from the quads if you're in that propulsive cycle. You go past it, you're going to shift to more posterior, more lateral muscles and structures. Whenever you internally rotate, you get anterior compression. The front side of your pelvis compresses, and that's going to line your femurs up in a way, because the joints are changing as you're moving the ilium and as you're circumstipping. It lines it up in a way that your quads really take all the pressure, because anterior compression is going to transfer force medially and anteriorly. Posterior compression, where we start to use the lower musculature of our pelvis or our butt, that's going to transfer force laterally and posteriorly. Even if you've got a lot of knee drive forward, you're not lining up tension on your quads as good as you possibly could. And most everybody's range of motion is going to end at about 90 degrees. What you could do, and it might help for some people, is you could do a little bit of an anterior pelvic orientation as you're getting towards the bottom half of the descent. So you don't want to start preloaded with an anterior tilt. That's fucking retarded. That's Dr. Mike shit. But as you're going down, your pelvis is going to want to start pulling under. It's hard to maintain that lower posterior expansion as we're hitting depth. A tiny little bit of anterior tilt can give you more internal rotation space to utilize and keep a little more tension on your quads for a little bit longer. So you can play with that strategy. People like to ER their squat and rotate out because it's easier. It makes your joints more stable, but we don't want that. We want relative motion. We want to create what's called an axial internal rotation spiral. And all that means is everything is moving through internal rotation together. We have the iliums moving, we've got the femurs moving, we're gonna have the tibia moving, we're gonna have the ankle going to dorsiflexion, we're gonna have the foot moving towards pronation. They all need to be moving together to create that axial spiral. And you can think of that as something just getting spring loaded. If you were to get a really tightly wound spring and just push it straight down, it's going to be able to come up with a lot of force, a lot of tension, and that's your quads essentially. If you don't load it straight down, you load it kind of all off to the side, and if you can get it down, it's going to pop up and go kind of everywhere. It's going to disperse the force everywhere. We want to create that alignment of everything moving in internal rotation together. And again, that means your joints are going to be moving more. They're going to be having a lot more relative motion, but it's actually going to be much healthier for them long term to move the way that they're supposed to, instead of just trying to lock everything in place through external rotation. The only time you ever want to do that bullshit is if you have to for powerlifting meet. So if you do create the anterior compression by getting internal rotation, then all the dead guy anatomy stuff lines up really well. But like I said, if you don't, if you're posteriorly compressed, it doesn't really matter how far forward your knee's translating. And all the while that you're doing this, keep your stack. If you guys have been watching my channel for any length of time, I kind of hope I wouldn't have to say that, but there could always be some new viewers. So really important, make sure your ribs aren't really flaring out. If they start doing that, your ribs are going to go, your pelvis is going to follow, and you're going to lose that ability to start in early propulsion, which means you're not going to really be able to finish in mid propulsion. So keep control of your ribs. So really, that's it. That's the secret. Okay, you could stop here if all you wanted to know was the one technique thing that you're probably missing out on to improve your quads from squat patterns, which squat patterns are what's going to grow your quads anyway. It's not going to be leg extensions. I promise you'll never see someone with big legs say leg extensions are what's going to be most optimal for hypertrophy. So that's it. Think about some internal rotation from the beginning. Think about the foot contact just moving from your middle heel to your inner heel to the first med head to flattening out. You just think about all that. That's 95% of everything. You'll be all good. Now, if you're having trouble accessing that IR and actually connecting with your quads, I'm gonna go over a couple drills that can help with that later. Right now, I'm gonna show you what it looks like when you actually do things what I consider perfect or close to perfect. All right, so let's go through a couple visual examples of what I'm talking about. I know this particular angle is really shit. I had no space. I was right against the mirror. I do have some better examples later of other people, but I think you can get an idea of what I mean here. What I want you to pay attention to is what's going on with my femurs at the start of the hack squat. So I'm doing a little bit of a right arm reach just because I'm a little turned. I want to get in that left side more. But in general, I do like to reach down with arms instead of holding up because you can keep your stack easier. So look how hard these are. These are actually really hard with only 2 plates. I have good internal rotation. Look right there. I kind of started with a little internal rotation. I'm really thinking about the foot context. That was really hard. That one almost was 1 or 2 reps away from failure with that kind of intensity. Now watch now. I'm just turned out just a little bit, not much, but I'm not as dialed in as I just was. And that was a lot easier. So let's see if you can see that difference again. All right, so let's see if you can see the difference. So right here, as I start this move, you're gonna see a little bit of internal rotation occur at the femur, and that's gonna be paired with a shape change of the pelvis too. So right there, that little subtle bit, just that little turn in there is gonna make this one real hard. Just look at my face, look at this, look at the grind on this rep. Oh, now this next one, just a little bit out, not much at all, but exponentially easier. And now I'm going to show you what it looks like when people do this really wrong, which you see a lot. It's going to look like this. They flare out, they get deeper, and that's way easier. Like sometimes people will see me using a small range of motion and like, oh, that's light, that's easy with a small range of motion. I'm like, no, it is way harder because I'm putting 100% of everything into some very specific tissues. I could go wide and go deep way heavier. So you want to stay narrow, apply that little internal rotation, not there, right there. Start with that. Like that, exactly. And again, you don't want your knees to get all weird and knock knee. That's not going to happen if you keep pressure on the right parts of your foot. And even though you're heavy on the inner part, you're never going to lose the outer. Never going to lose that 5th med head. You don't want to completely lose under your pinky. You're just going to be really light under there. So you shouldn't be collapsing in at the knees or the feet. So while I would definitely say that squat patterns are the key to getting big sweeping quads, if we want to maximize our leg extensions, we want to make sure that we're producing counter force. Now, I posted a video just a couple of weeks ago about my favorite cues looking at lifting through an ECM perspective, and this cue was on there. As you're lifting up the legs, you want to be applying hip extension down into the pad with your hamstrings. So we want to get that counter force to really get our joints to line up the best way to put as much tension as possible on the quads. Like all the cues I give you, this will make it way, way harder. So as the legs are coming up, I'm pushing hip extension, pushing the hamstrings down into the butt pad. We want knee extension to be paired with hip extension. So you can kind of see the difference. I'm applying a lot of pressure. I'm getting all shaky. It's getting really hard. Now this one's getting real close to failure. I'm getting all shaky. But if I lose a little bit of that counter force, it gets way easier. Like I think that is all I've got. I look like I'm spazzing out. And now I'm gonna let go. Look, I can crank out 5 more that way. So while I don't think that leg extensions are necessarily the best for growth, I do think that they help a lot with the separation of the different quad muscles. And now on a leg press, you're not starting from as much of an early propulsive position. So you won't feel quite as much as your heel, but other than that, you're gonna keep the same principles intact in mind. You're gonna be pressing harder in the inner foot, letting it go more and more to the first med head to the point where you start to flatten the arch at the end. See, those knees are just really driving forward, almost on like an inner track. I'm going over like my big toe just about. And on this machine in particular, I'm thinking about creating a little of that anterior tilt I was talking about. And I feel a ton of sweep on this, just a ton. And that is all the range of motion you want. I don't have any kind of butt wink going on. That is 100% quads. And that was burning. So I definitely think the most important thing developing good quads is getting a squat pattern that biases your quads, driving internal rotation. I'm going to show you some of my other quad training just to show you that I do different things. Like a lot of times people think I get stuck in one way of thought, like I'm against varied movement. I've done a lot of crazy shit. I was like a ninja before. So I'm all for movement variability and going through big ranges of motion if you can achieve them. I don't think it's that good for growth. I don't think any of the shit I did here helped me get my quads. I started doing a lot less of this and just focusing more on the stuff that I just showed you, and my quads improved a lot. But here are some other things that I have done for quads. I do think that there's some benefit to getting like a lengthened bias move. And honestly, this was one of the most sore I've ever been in my life on my quads, was doing this reverse Nordic. This was really hard. I mean, most people can't do this. You got to build up to this kind of stuff. Most people need even like assistance potentially, but I do like lengthened bias stuff. I just think it's probably pretty low on the totem pole when it comes to what is actually contributing the most to quad growth. So here I am doing some like sissies on the hack. I'm a fan of that. I do that pretty often, relatively often, not as much lately. But again, I'm not against like knees over toes. I don't know what he promotes. Like a lot of people ask me to critique him or talk about him. I don't know his thing, but I'm fine with your knees over your toes. And I just think that a lot of the stuff that some people try to do, they don't have a good axial skeleton position to attempt, or they also just don't have control of their body to attempt. But if you can, this stuff is fine. So here I am doing squats with 4 plates on the Smith, and this is a heavy Smith, the Cybex, trying to bias quads. So I got a slight wedge. Now this isn't like 100% biasing quads. I do a version where I'd have to go a little bit lighter. I only can get like 275 and it's a smaller range, but this is me trying to get mainly quads, and this is all the depth you want to get on here. So I'm fighting, like I'm not getting to where I'm getting a butt wink, but this is still getting a little bit of other things. I'm not able to bias internal rotation just so crazily on that. Now here's an example of me doing a squat that I would say is not really biasing my quads all that much, but it's kind of getting a little bit of everything. I'm not only getting my ass, but this was during that time period where my ass was huge. So I'm repping out 455 for like 8 or 10, I think. So I would say this is good form. I'm getting the slightest butt wink, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but this isn't good form for like a lot of quad tension. And this was taxing. I mean, putting this on your back and doing high volume with this, like, it's probably not, worth it from a bodybuilding perspective once you get this strong. I think you're way better off on a hack if you're trying to grow your quads. And if you are trying to grow your adductors and your glutes, I really love a belt squat, doing like sumos on there. That's really my favorite. So here I'm doing some single leg press. And again, I'm really focusing on getting the knee over the toe as long as I don't lose the heel and I don't get any kind of butt wink. So nothing crazy. Nowadays, I probably wouldn't even use the heel elevated shoe. I kind of like the minimal shoes because I can feel what's going on with the foot better. I can promote that IR and pronation better with that. Here I am. This is kind of a period where I'm trying to figure out how to grow my fucking quads. So it's like I'm testing all these different things out. So I'm doing this Roger squat with a 20-degree wedge. I'm actually going a little too low on this one, I would say. I'm getting a little bit too much of a butt wink. If I stopped like right there, that would be fine. But I'm dropping down. That's too low. And I usually do the low arm reach because it helps you stay stacked a lot easier. So I wouldn't say this is bad at all, but I don't think that was it. Here I am doing a single leg reverse Nordic. I'm a fan of these mainly for mobility purposes, but I like them a lot, and I do include this pretty regularly for myself and a lot of clients. Here I am on the hack, and this was before I really had the full concept of like mid propulsion and IR, but I'm trying to stay relatively IR'd. I know I get less butt than if I go out, and I'm really trying to drive my knees forward. So this doesn't look bad at all, but I could get more out of it now. So back on the Rogers, I still got the big wedge, but now I've added some chains to kind of bias quads at the top a little more still. And I don't think this was it either. I think I lost a little bit. Like that one was pretty good, but a couple of these were a little bit off. Sissy squats on the pendulum. This is actually one of my favorites. Sometimes I like hack squats for sissies, but pendulum in general tends to be a better setup, and it's hard. And I added the band just to get a little more out of it. Now, out of all the variations I did on the Rogers, this is probably the best, the most quad dominant one. And I just took away the wedges, and I just feel like I'm keeping way more tension on there. Transformer bar with the front squat setting. That's one of the only ways I can actually squat with a bar on my back with a quad focus. That is really hard, free weight rise. And it's just way heavier. Like squatting with just your quads is way tougher than getting your posterior chain involved. Here I'm doing 275 for 12, and this was 405. I did for 6, but I could have got like 10 on it. It really wasn't heavy. I was, you're using a lot more muscles. You're dispersing a lot more of the force, so it's going to be a lot easier. So don't be attached to the weight. Now, I wanted to give you guys another example of somebody that I would say does things pretty much perfectly, just like me. Somebody who's a lot bigger, so he has a little bit more credibility potentially, and that is my man Robin Strand. So we've done a couple of podcasts together, and let's look at Robin's legs. I definitely think they are a stronger body part for him. Crazy separation. And I mean, if you look here, this is the show where he got super pilled. I mean, that's a lot of detail. They look great. And Robin's going to have the most similar training style to me than anyone else that you're going to see out there. And a lot of that's because he works with Eric Seifert, who I've had on the podcast multiple times. He's awesome. And we really look at biomechanics like very similarly through somewhat different lenses, but we get to the same outcomes. So if you're ever curious on who I would say has the best form that is a pro bodybuilder, that's going to be Robin. We do things, like I said, pretty much identically. So let's listen to his cues on a hack squat, because he kind of gives you things that I was talking about from a slightly different perspective.
So I think one of the biggest mistakes people make on this one is that they're going to be arching their back a lot, and they're going to think about, I got to get down all the way down.
Right? People arch big from the beginning because that gives them space to move into as they go down. You guys know me. Keep your stack from the beginning.
Like this. So their lower back is arched. They're being pushed off the seat. And yeah, I'm going to get full range on the sled, but that's putting my back, my spine at a lot of risk. It's also going to stress out my knees. So what I want to think about is,
it's not the range of motion that's bad for your knees, it's the joint alignment. Like, you can do a huge range of motion if you can create the shape needed to transfer that force effectively. Range of motion in itself is not good or bad arbitrarily.
it's actually using my abs, again, to push myself through the back of the seat. So you couldn't slide your hand underneath my back.
I would say for most people that's a fine cue. Eventually you might not want to think about like so much abs, especially not like if you're losing height. It's a little deeper stuff. It's more like IOs, internal obliques and transverse abdominals. So you should be able to go pretty flat, but you shouldn't be like pushing so hard through there that like there's a lot of pressure. And you might have like a tiniest little bit of space like right in that low back, but shouldn't be much at all. You should feel pretty good pressure on your SI joints. I would say make sure you have equal pressure there more than anything.
And as I go down, I'm thinking about my knees going towards the mirror.
The mirror's just in front of him, so knees over toes.
Staying on the inside of my foot.
Inside of the foot, just like I was saying. He doesn't really go into like the full gay pattern, but staying on the inside of your foot will take care of like 90+% of that.
And I can push just from the...
And also, when you watch Robin go, you'll notice that his knees never go backwards. They only
quads.
Track forward.
And I can still get a full range of motion, but down here, I'm not slipping off the pad.
And some people do that, but I would say it's more often people get kind of like a wider stance and get arched and kind of like make it more of a posterior compression move. You do see that sometimes though.
So see, that's the difference. I'm going now way over my toes and getting off my foot. I want to be able to stay on my foot, stay on my quad. And then even what I like to do with this one, I'll put my hand here so I can shove my shoulder, keep my spine straight.
So kind of like I was saying when I was doing the hack squat, I like to reach low to keep a better stack. So same thing. So like I said, me and Robin, we think very similarly.
Great.
So look, knee only goes forward. Only forward. So let's look at him do an actual work weight and see if he still keeps such good mechanics. All right. So we're watching him go. Back is flat. Knees are only going forward. You can see the actual pressure going to the inner part of the feet. And that's his full range, and that is all the range you need. I do think Robin would benefit from a little bit more posterior expansion. Like this form's fine, but if he had a little bit more space, that femur might actually drive back a little bit more and give him like another hair range of motion or even a little better tension on the quads. But yeah, these are money. These are really good. And as we're heavier, you see, nothing changes. Still looks the same as when he had just a plate on. Knees are only traveling forward. There's nothing going on with the pelvis. Feet are very, very like stationary. They're not moving to the outside. He's really grounded. Yeah, this is what a hack squat should look like. Better angle than what I showed you. I just want to give you one more little angle because I kind of like this because you can see his feet a little bit more. And you can see there is pressure going to the inner feet as he's going down. Is building up a little bit more. And again, you can see his range of motion, 90 degrees. That is all you need. That's all you like want if you're trying to get quads. Let's listen to my man Eric, who I was just talking about, giving him some cues on leg extension. I think it'll sound very familiar.
We're gonna just stay at this partial top third range, focusing on driving down. Most people are rocking off the front of this, right? They let go, they let their bum come out. We're gonna try and drive down to get as much pressure at the back, to get the most amount of service.
Look how he's shaking too, just like I was when you produced that counterforce.
And here's the funny part. Robin is trying to drive his legs through the seat.
Just like I was saying, Eric's got some really great thoughts on biomechanics, really great ideas. So definitely check out our podcast if you haven't seen. We dive in deep to some concepts. And then let's just look at him doing some leg press. It's going to look like a really small range of motion, but that is what you need. That is all quads. And you can see he's got a little, like, I wouldn't say a wider stance, but it's not super narrow. But sometimes that helps as you go a little heavier. You have to go a little wider to still bias IR. But he's really biasing internal rotation. You can see quads are taking all that tension. And even though it's a small range of motion, look at his face. You can tell it's not fucking easy. So what do you do if you just have trouble accessing that range of motion? You just have trouble accessing internal rotation. You can't really drive that mid-propulsive cycle while you've got weight on your back going down to a squat pattern. Well, there are some things that we can do to help. You might need to open up some space, and you might need to just kind of train your brain what it feels like to move through space with that pelvic shape, driving tension to the quads. So here's a few things that you can do to get you in a better position to be able to do the things that I'm recommending. Okay, so if you are a typical bodybuilder, you probably are missing all sorts of ranges of motion. Make sure to check out my videos, the 2 PRI and bodybuilding videos, the crooked bodybuilder leg workout, and the broken bodybuilder leg workout to see exactly where you fall, because there are maybe some specific positional breathing drills that could really help you. I'm only going to cover a couple in this video that should help everybody, but especially if you have not been squatting in a way that's going to promote internal rotation. So first thing we got to do is we actually got to make sure that you have early external rotation, or this early propulsive phase of the gait cycle that you've heard me talking about. So a lot of people, especially if you're a wider ISA, they have a pelvis that's a little bit anteriorly tipped and pushed forward, and a wide ISA is going to have a little bit more nutation and internal rotation bias anyway through their pelvis. So what that means is they're actually going to be missing external rotation space from the beginning to build into that internal rotation. They're starting kind of already at the midpoint. So what we want to do is we want to get that pelvis to pull back and counter-nutate a little bit. So we need a slight posterior orientation most likely, and slight counter-nutation of the sacrum and ilium in order to be able to get a better starting point to produce internal rotation from using our quads. So pretty much most all the other positional breathing drills I'm going to cover are more about getting good at internal rotation. This one is mainly about restoring external rotation to start from. Now, if you're more of a really narrow ISA and you've got a lot of external rotation available, you might not need to do this move, because in general, narrow ISAs are going to be better at squatting and putting tension on their quads, just because they start with less nutation. They're just a little more posteriorly oriented with their pelvis. They're going to stay a lot more upright just naturally when they're squatting. They're also going to have a lot more natural, more posterior expansion down low. So they're going to be able to get into a deep squat, keeping tension on the quads a lot easier than someone who's a really wide ISA and starting from a more internally rotated position of the sacrum and ilium. So anytime you see a really good squatter, that's the reason why it's always Asians. Asians always squat straight up and down right. It's because they're pretty much always narrow ISAs. They're really good at it. So you'll be a lot better at putting tension on your quads naturally if you do have that kind of pelvis shape that goes with a narrow ISA. Doesn't mean you can't get tons of tension on your quads. If you don't, you just might be better off using an implement like a pendulum, or, as I mentioned before, hack squat is probably your bread and butter if you're a wider ISA. So for this move, we're just going to go against a wall with a band. We're going to be in an early external rotation representation, so we got a slightly negative shin angle, and I'm not pulling apart the band. I'm just keeping tension on it. I have a lot of pressure on my heels, more on the heel versus the forefront. I'm pretty heavy on the SI joints. I'm not really heavy on my butt, and I'm not tucked under really hard. As I exhale, I'm going to give myself a gentle reach down and away from my body to try to get these ribs to drop. Right there's the drop. And as I inhale, I got to make sure not to get any elevation of the shoulders or neck muscles involved. So that's going to kind of eliminate some upper posterior compression. So you'll be able to have a little bit more of an early propulsive start to your squat which is going to allow you to have more internal rotation force to build up into. Now, narrow ISAs aren't really good at hinging. They're not the best at internal rotation in general, but a squat pattern doesn't typically require like a ton of internal rotation. Usually they're going to be better at internal rotating through a squat than a wider ISA. So after that, the next move I would recommend is just the good old-fashioned 90-90 hip lift. And I would say probably put your feet a little bit outside your knees, so you're going to be a little bit of passive internal rotation. You won't be super duper knock knees, but they will be a little bit inside your feet. And really focus on feeling the inner heel and that first med head, and you're just going to pull your butt up just a little bit. And I'm going to reach straight up to 90 degrees, but same thing as I exhale, I'm going to reach and try to get those ribs to drop. And as I inhale, I want to make sure I don't let the ribs flare right away. I'm going to keep them down in the initial part. And so this could also even help restore a little bit of early external rotation just by reorienting your pelvis a little bit, by getting a little slight posterior orientation. But this should drive some IR. You're going to give the ball a gentle squeeze, but being in that position, squeezing it with your feet out, that should give you a little bit more internal rotation space to work with. Okay, and finally, the last just kind of boring positional breathing drill we're going to do is a good old frog breathing move. So I'm going to show you kind of what it looks like from all the different angles so you can see the setup. So we're going to have our arms in a wide base, like a wide triangle, making a triangle with your hands as well. And feet will be together, knees will be out wide. So what we're doing is we're starting from like a really externally rotated position with a lot of space to build into internal rotation. So again, if you don't have a lot of internal rotation available to you, starting from a more external rotated position will allow you to produce that force. As I exhale, I'm going to gently squeeze the knees into the ground, elbows into the ground, and I'm going to slightly pronate the palms into the ground on the exhale. So I'm just pairing that exhalation with all things internal rotation, because exhalation is internal rotation. That's force production. They all go together. It's compression. Now, I'm not doing that enough to get a ton of muscle activity, but just like a 2 or 3 out of 10 effort. And so this should help give you a little bit more internal rotation in the hips and the shoulders. And this is just a really good starting point if you're somebody who hasn't really done any kind of positional breathing and you're just in general pretty tight like most people are. You don't have any serious major issues, but if you do this before you try to get into a little more quad bias squat pattern, you'll probably do it a little bit more efficiently. All right, so now we're gonna get into kind of like warm-up stuff. This isn't the positional breathing drills. We're gonna get into some isometrics. So I've got a ball between my knees and I'm gonna squat down using some support. Now, the first squat, I was against a wall in a negative shin angle, only like 6 degrees of hip flexion. So I was on my heels, I was biasing more external rotation. Now I'm biasing more internal rotation. I have a ball between my knees instead of a band, and I'm not as heavy on my heels. I'm pretty even on the first med head and the inner heel. Now I'm holding on the bar for support, and you want to use it enough so that if you were to let go, you would fall back, but it'd be slow. You wouldn't just immediately crash to the ground behind you. And so you're going to really focus on those foot contact points I mentioned, starting on the heel and then moving through to the first med head and then to the point where the arches are starting to flatten. And you're going to get to the point where you start to feel your glutes engage. You're going to feel a ton of quads, but you should feel your glutes as well. You're just going to hang out there and just breathe. This is going to promote some posterior expansion. It's going to help you kind of see what it would feel like to be at the bottom of a really quad dominant squat. And it's going to allow you to feel what it's like to produce internal rotation from that bottom position as well. So see, I'm getting a little bit shaky. That is always a good sign. And I would say hold this for like 30 seconds, just 2 sets is plenty. So I really like to start with isometrics, just really focusing on getting good breaths while you're doing it. Here's another move that's really good. This is a split squat, trying to get pretty much everything at 90 degrees. I'm gonna show you a couple variations. You could just do this on the ground with just nothing. You don't have to use the roller or do any of the other versions I'm gonna show you, but this can help drive more internal rotation. So what we wanna do is finish at 90 degrees with everything, right around there with your knees, your hips, your ankles. You're going to hold the bottom of that split squat in that 90-degree angle position, and that's going to drive internal rotation through the whole system. Now, with the roller on the inside of the leg, that's going to allow us to bias even more internal rotation, which can be really helpful if you're having trouble like keeping a stable foot, or you feel like you're not really able to find that medial line of tension, the more inner stuff stabilizing you, you're feeling more lateral stuff. This can help. So just gonna take some deep breaths. I like to do a low reach with the elbows from here, and you don't need the roller. I actually like this version a lot with my back foot against the wall. Again, you don't even have to do that, but I just really like that, and You're going to try to stay as upright as possible, get some anterior expansion on one side and posterior expansion on the other. Now, some people are going to have a really hard time holding that position, particularly the really more narrow ISAs, or someone who's just got a lot of anterior pelvic tilt. That could be really hard as well. So if you're falling into that category, what I recommend is using a block. I have a DC block, which is like 2 inches under the front foot, and that's going to allow you to start from a more externally rotated position, so we'll have more space to move into. And a lot of people, if they are really anteriorly tilted, like as soon as they start to lower themselves, they bend over and flex at the hips. They don't really have the ability to drop straight down without doing that. So something you can do is you can get a weight in front of you, and that's going to push your center of gravity back a little bit. That's going to allow you to stay more upright and get a stretch on that back leg. So this is something I do a lot for people that just can't quite connect to keeping that back leg straight down and getting that stretch. And just same thing, you're just going to breathe from here. So that can be a really easy way to make things line up without you having to think about things. And again, while we're here, we're thinking about the 2 inner foot contacts, first med head and the inner heel. You got to make sure you're breathing. None of this matters if you're not breathing while you're holding that position. All right, so let's go over one more warm-up that I really like to do as part of my quad day prep. This is really great. If you're the person who's always squatting with a really posteriorly compressed pelvis, you're always externally rotating, turning out the knees, getting wide, and opening up your hips to get more depth, this is a great way to rewire your brain and actually connect with your quads during a squat pattern. So I got a roller, I'm going to put it behind my back down low, and I've got a little ramp below. I don't know if you can see it. This might even be a little bit steeper than what I would like. Ideally, I just have like a 10-degree ramp, and even 5, but usually 10. I've got my whole foot on there. This is a little steeper. I have a little bit of my heel off. That can work too. So I'm going to go in a goblet squat, and I'm going to go straight down, focusing on driving a little bit of internal rotation, kind of letting the femurs turn in very slightly, driving forward, and the slight reverse wedge is also going to promote more internal rotation too. So just like that, and this can really help you connect to what that line of tension should feel like when you're really making your quads do all the stabilizing and all the work on the way up too. And you can add a little pause on this if you want, but this will really help get things lit up in a way that'll translate to what we want in our squat pattern. So I really just specialize with the biomechanics. That is my main thing, but I know a lot of people will ask like how to pair this with the best programming to get the most out of your quads. So for me, what I recommend is hitting quads twice a week. It could be more biased towards hamstrings on one day where you just touch quads up a little bit, but then having at least one full day of nothing but quads. And when it comes to volume, I'm going to recommend a little bit higher. That seems to be one of the keys to get really good growth from your legs. So the first movement I'm going to recommend you do is a hack squat. I just don't think there's really a good substitute for that. I usually recommend about 2 working sets for most things, and I would say 10 to 12 reps for the hack squat. You're going to have your leg extension in there. I usually do 3 sets of 12 to 15 on that. I like to add pauses on the first set at least. And then after your hack squat and your leg extensions, then I recommend some kind of another squat pattern. So this could be a free weight squat if you've got good mechanics and can do that. It could be a Smith squat. It could be something like the Roger squat. Anything that's going to mimic a pretty natural squat pattern. I would do one more kind of knee dominant movement, whether it is a pendulum squat or kind of a lower foot placed leg press. Either of those could be good. It could be like a hip press or something like that. And then might as well throw in some kind of lengthened movement, whether it's a reverse Nordic or some kind of a sissy. I do think there's benefit to it. You know, I think it's kind of more optional. I might throw it in like just once a week, but in general, I would say hack squat's your main one. Leg extensions, some kind of squat pattern if you don't want to squat, another knee dominant move, whether that is a pendulum or a leg press, and then some kind of lengthened bias. I would just do 2 sets of everything except for the leg extension where I do 3. So that's like 11 to 12 sets. Maybe you do 4 sets of work on your other leg day, so you're getting about 16 sets of total volume per week on your quads. And I'm not really dropping below 10 reps on pretty much anything. All right, so hopefully this video is going to give you guys some things to think about when it comes to training your quads. I promise if you apply these principles, you will feel a way better connection to them. You'll start noticing increases in size and detail pretty quickly. So give it a shot. Let me know what you think. If you have any questions, drop them below. I really appreciate the support. Thanks a lot, guys.